So this is another tutorial about how to take pictures of microscopic samples using your microscope setup. So I'm going to again click on the camera that I have connected to the computer. It is inserted into the ocular of the microscope, so I can click on it, and since I've already turned on the microscope, an image should appear. So here we are. It will take a minute to adjust the exposure, so it might look too dark or too bright for a minute, but after a little bit, you should see something like this. So if you remember from the calibration tutorial, one of the most common mistakes is not having the right magnification set. So I have now put it on 10x objective. So I need to select that magnification here so that it matches the reality of what I actually have in front of me. So it's not 4x. I'm looking at it at 10x magnification. Always set this to what it actually is. When you switch objectives, make sure that you also switch it here in the software. That way your measurements are going to be accurate. All right, so I'm looking at a sample. There's a bunch of things here. There's some diatoms, and there's a little desmid here in the middle that I'm viewing in an apical view. I'm going to explain the common genera of desmids in a different tutorial, but let's say that I found the target that I want to look at. It's pretty small though, so I'll want to switch objectives and look at it under 40x. Of course, before I do that, I could also make it look bigger under 10x, which is good, but that's not really the appropriate magnification here. We want to get the best picture possible. So carefully, so that I don't run the objective into the sample, I'm going to switch to 40x. You'll want to watch it from the side. You might want to even lower the microscope stage. So again, you don't damage the objective. I changed objectives, so I need to change magnification up here as well. And then with the fine focus, again, it's a little bit delayed, so be patient and move it slowly. I'm going to focus on one half, the top half of the cell here. So let's say that I found focus. So it's a three-dimensional object, so the bottom is blurry, but the top half is in focus. So you're not going to be able to get everything in focus. And the thing is, you'll probably need to take multiple pictures per specimen. I'll, again, explain that separately, but for now, just the simple mechanics. I'm seeing what I want to be seeing. There are a couple adjustments that I might want to make. So first, I'm going to make sure that the snap is at maximum resolution. I can have the live at lower resolution. That's not a problem. It will actually refresh faster if I do that, but the picture should be taken at the maximum resolution. So make sure that it's set that way. The other thing you might want to adjust is exposure. So the brightness of the picture depends on a couple of different things. You might want to adjust the actual light intensity, which you can do with this little scroller on the side of the bottom of the microscope. You can also adjust light intensity and contrast with the aperture that's above that light source. So I'm moving that now. You see that it can get darker but more contrasty, so you can adjust that so that it shows what you want to show. And leave it here. But then also, you can adjust the exposure. So it is set on auto exposure, which is probably fine unless you know, most of the picture is really dark and you want to take a picture of something that's different than the rest of the picture, in which case the exposure might not be auto exposed to your liking, so you can change that. You can also unclick the auto exposure and adjust the actual exposure time manually. The longer the exposure time, the more light gets into the camera in that longer time, so it will be brighter. So that's one way to make the picture brighter, especially at high magnifications when you might have a hard time getting enough light. However, that means in this case, it's going to take almost half a second to take the picture. Make sure that you don't bump the microscope in that time. So you might want to take your hands off of the table or something like that. And that might be just generally problematic if your sample is moving, like if there's a lot of water, there might be some small animals moving in there. In that case, you have a higher chance of getting a blurry image, which might be problematic. So pay attention to that, but it is something that you might choose to set manually. But for most purposes, probably the auto exposure will be just fine. It might take a second to reset and auto expose, but as you can see, it's pretty good. The other thing you might want to play with is white balance. So telling the program what you consider white or what you consider the blank space. So if you want to, if it seems like the colors are off or something like that, like the green chloroplast doesn't look green like it looks in your microscope, you'll want to move this white balance rectangle somewhere where there's nothing, where it's an actual empty blank space in the view, and then you can either expose it or set it manually, or what I recommend is just once you have it moved where you want it, just click on white balance and sort of readjust so that artificial blue has disappeared and what you see looks more like what you actually see in the microscope through the oculars. So those are a couple of things you might want to adjust. And usually, especially the white balance, is not something you have to do all the time. You might want to do it once at the beginning of your microscope session, and that might be enough. There are a bunch of other things you can play with, but you probably don't have to. These are just a couple of things that you might want to adjust in order to make your picture look the best it can. All right, so my specimen has moved a little, but it's still in focus, so I'm just going to go ahead and take a picture. And that is very easy. Again, make sure your magnification is set correctly. If you want to zoom a little bit, if that helps you adjust the focus, you can certainly do that. So if that helps, I like being able to see a little bit bigger part of the field, but that is up to you. You can click snap, and you can see it created sort of a temporary file. So now it is stationary. It's not going to move anymore. And it's not saved anywhere yet. So you might want to save it first. Or sometimes you'll want to take a bunch of pictures. They will show up as multiple tabs here and then save them. If you're worried about your computer crashing, if it doesn't have a lot of memory, you might want to save every picture to be sure that you don't lose the data in case the program shuts down unexpectedly. That can happen. It shouldn't, but it can. One thing that I highly recommend, if you have a specimen that only takes up a small portion of the picture, right? Saving this entire high resolution picture will make for a really large file. So I recommend cropping first. And that you should do that not completely tight around the specimen, because maybe you'll want to put a scale bar there somewhere. It's certainly better to leave some space around the specimen, but you certainly don't need 3/4 of this picture. There are a couple of keyboard shortcuts to help with this that might be useful to remember, but if you don't remember them, you can always find them in this menu up here. So for example, under image, you can find crop, and it tells you that Shift C, which is kind of unusual, Shift-C is the keyboard shortcut to do the crop. So I have first selected this rectangle, designated what I wanted around it. I go to image and I crop it, and it has cropped it. So now I can save it. It's going to be a much smaller file. So I usually go to save as. I haven't made a new folder, but I'm going to make myself a new folder for this. I recommend being super organized about your pictures. It's really going to pay off down the line. So I'm going to name this folder with the name of the site where I collected it, which was new search blood site. And I'm also going to name it, put the date when I collected the sample here, which was 5/15/2020. So that's a little long, but it's very informative, which is better than not. And within this new folder, I'm going to name this, and this is up to you. You might want to number them, but if you are at least confident in the genus designation of your specimen, it's better to have informative names. So I'm going to name this Starastrum, Starastrum 1, because I'm probably going to see multiple different species of Starastrum. And the other thing that you might want to remember, and you only have to reset this once, the default is bitmap, which is not a great format. It loses a lot of information. The best would be probably TIFF, but JPEG is actually a good compromise. It's not as, it doesn't make huge files, and it's pretty good. It saves good resolution. It retains all the information that you want. So I'm going to save it as JPEG, give it an informative name, put it in an informatively named folder. I'm going to say save. So now it's saved, and that's good. Maybe the next thing that I want to do is put a scale bar on it. Again, all of that depends on you having correctly set the magnification. So if you want to put a scale bar on something, there is a button for that under measurements. Let's say that I want a 20 micrometer scale bar. As you can see, it put it right in the middle over my specimen. You can't really grab it and move it, which is incredibly annoying. But if you click on this object select, then you can move it. So otherwise you would have to set the coordinates here, which is, again, really annoying. The other thing that is a little unfortunate is the default color. There's a way to change the default, but it doesn't save the defaults from session to session. You can, however, click on it and change it to black. The other thing you might want to do is, because you can't really read that it's 20 micrometers, so increasing the font to something like maybe 30. Yeah, you'll have to see. Maybe 40 is better so that it's legible. And again, if you have this selected, you can sort of move it. Place it somewhere where you actually want it, because once we flatten the image, it kind of burns that scale bar into the image, and you're not going to be able to move it after that. So what I'm going to do is flatten it, or basically this created a new layer here. So now I would by default save it in a different format, but that's not what I want. What I want instead is go to layer and merge to image. it saved it as a new picture. So I can now file, save as, this one to overwrite it. So now I have it saved as a JPEG. I deleted, got rid of the original. Again, if you're worried about your computer crashing, you might want to save the intermediates, or maybe you just want to save the final product at the end. You'll have to find your own workflow. But once I've put, you see that I can no longer move this. It is permanently part of this image. So that's good. Having this saved is a good product. It will take a little while to get used to this workflow. You'll probably want multiple images of every specimen, and that's fine. I'll explain how you want probably different genera from different views so that you have the maximum information for this. But one other thing you may want to do is do some measurements while you have that specimen up here. So we're already in the measuring tab, and you can make some measurements about the width of your specimen, maybe with arms, without arms, diagonal. That's all good. You'll want to write this down or keep some notes about which measurements go with which picture and which specimen. You probably don't want to leave those bars on here. So again, you might actually delete them so that they don't show up on your picture, or simply close the picture and don't save it. That's another option. But you can do some very accurate measurements, again, as long as you have this set correctly. So I'm going to close it. I'm not going to save any of the changes I made afterwards. And then you can move on and take another picture. And once you've accumulated a bunch of pictures, that's when you'll want to upload them to iNaturalist, which is going to be a separate tutorial. But you'll want to practice this for a bit. It's going to take some time to get used to. It's probably going to take you more time than you think to get one good picture or a couple good pictures of a single specimen. That's completely normal. So take your time and take pictures, save them under informative names, crop them so that they don't take up gigabytes of space, and then you'll be able to upload them to the database.